So in this video, I'm just going to show you more in detail the microphones and the microphone placements that we're using. So starting with the bass drum, as I say, this is a 20-inch deep bass drum. We've got the Shure Beta 52A, which is about halfway down the diameter of the bass drum, and it's pointing just off center to where the beta of the pedal hits the back skin. Gives us a nice punchy sound, it's nice and clicky there. But then on the outside, we've got this Royer ribbon mic, which is the 121. It's a more expensive microphone, and it is a little bit more of a delicate microphone, but it can handle the sound pressure levels of this sort of drum. You will have noticed in the introduction video that we had the duvet covering the bass drum. That's just to stop any other drum bleed going into this Royer mic, because it does have a tendency to pick up everything. It has a figure of 8 pattern, so it picks up just as much behind as what it does in front. So we've got that slightly pointing at about 40-degree angle down to the floor, just so it's not getting the full attack of the bass drum. That's being left to the Shure mic on the inside. Okay, so on the snare, we've got, as I said, the Telefunken M80. We're about 2 inches off the top snare skin, and we're pointing to around the center of the drum. It's a good starting spot for any snare drum. You can often find you can tilt it further back towards the rim and you'll get more of a ringy sound, but for what we're doing, we've got it straight to the middle and it's working quite well. We've not got any dampening on this snare, it's got a nice ring to it as it is. Sometimes you can buy little moon gels or anything to dampen. Some people will even put their wallet and just rest it on the top skin to create a more dead sound. But for what we're doing, we quite like the ringiness of this snare, so we're leaving that as it is. So on the bottom we've got Shure SM57. It's a standard cardioid dynamic microphone. It works great on any application. We're using it for the snare bottom and for the ride cymbal, but we could put 10 SM57s around this drum kit and it would all sound decent. The reason we've got it on the bottom is just so we can capture the snare wires, which are underneath there. We don't always have a great deal of that track in the mix in the final product, but it's good to have it so we can affect it in there if we want to. So with the MD421, this is the Sennheiser microphone, we've got that pointing almost straight down at this tom, but we're quite close to the edge. That gives it a nice sort of ring to the sound. You can point more towards the center, depending on the type of drum head you're using. If you're using a coated head, that can sometimes have a nicer sound, depending though, like I say, on what you're going for. But for what we're doing today, this is working quite well. We've got it pointing almost straight down, and it's close to the edge, and that's on both of these toms actually. So again, we're not using any dampening, we've just got the same mic in the same sort of place for both the rack tom and the floor tom. So the Shure SM7B here is obviously on the hi-hats. Now this mic can be used for all sorts. Again, it works great in the bass drum, it works great on snares, it works great on guitar cabs, bass cabs, but you see these a lot in radio broadcast places as well, as it does work great as a vocal mic. Purely by accident and a little bit of YouTube research, I came across where they were trying these SM7s out on a hi-hat, and it sounds great. So that's the reason I'm using that there today. It's pointing directly towards the bell of the hi-hat, but it's also in line with the snare. So the idea is to try and keep the phase as accurate as possible, depending on obviously placements, but that's why we've got that there. So again, we're using the SM57 on the ride cymbal. Again, we're pointing directly down towards the bell, but trying to keep it in line with the snare, similar to what we did with the hi-hat. Again, it's the same as what we've got underneath the snare drum, so they're not the most expensive mic, but they're industry standard. They work great for what we're using. So with the overheads, we're using a matched pair of AKG 414s. These are set in a cardioid mode at the moment. They are capable of doing figure of 8 or omnidirectional as well as others. They do have a bass roll-off or high-pass filter on each microphone as well, but I'm not using that for today. We're not padding or anything like that. It is purely just set to cardioid. You'll notice this one on my right is slightly lower than this one, and the idea is I try and get these an equal distance from the snare drum to help with phase. So the way I do that, I'll get this first one in place, and then I'll pop a cable of any sort. I'll just hold that in the middle of the snare drum, and I'll measure up that first mic, and I'll try and just think where that is in relation to my thumb, bring it over to the second. So as long as I know those two are the same distance, then phase shouldn't be an issue, sorry. Phase is something that's worth considering when you're using more than one microphone for anything. If you can imagine a waveform moving across like you'll see in Pro Tools when we get to it, if something is out of phase, it means that the waveform on another microphone is probably going the other way. And in theory, that can cancel that sound out. So sometimes you might notice you've got your overheads for drums, you've got your kick and snare mic if you're just using 4 mics. You might notice that your snare drum sounds really thin, or your bass drum might sound a little bit thin. And there's a button which I'll show you in the control room that we can press where we flip the phase, and then that all of a sudden that will come to life. So you'll notice loads more low end in your snare or your bass drum when you do that. We have had to flip the phase on these overheads for today, but it's working great so far. Okay, so normally we would use room microphones as well, but because we're in quite a small dead room, it's not really that beneficial for what we're doing. There are some processes that we can do afterwards to help with this. So one thing we can do is use some sort of room simulation plugin effect within Pro Tools. But more recently, some studios are offering a service where you can send them your drum tracks as a rough mix, and they will re-mic that for you through their live room. So they will set up some mics around their nice, well-designed live room, and then that studio can return you some drum stems of different mics around their room, but with your drum performance. It works great. I've done it in the past, and it does work great for this type of thing. So if we're on a budget or in a smaller space or a less than ideal space, we can do that. We can send it. It's not much to do. It's about £25 to do it, depending on the studio obviously, but the one I would use in particular for this project is 25 Canadian dollars, so it works out really cheap. So that's everything regarding the microphone placement for today. In the next video we're going to go a little bit more in detail on our signal paths.